October 25th, 1944, the Formosa Strait. The USS Tang, the most decorated predator of the Pacific, is moments away from completing a flawless mission. Commander Richard O'Kane has just fired his final torpedo, the 24th sting of a legendary patrol. But as the crew waits for the impact of victory, the ocean's rhythm shifts. A phosphorescent wake meant for the enemy begins an impossible slow-motion curve. It isn't missed. It's returning. How does the ocean's greatest hunter suddenly find itself in the crosshairs of its own perfect weapon? What hidden flaw in American engineering turned a triumph into a desperate struggle for breath in an iron tomb 180 feet below? And when the survivors finally break the surface, why would they soon wish they had stayed in the abyss? We are about to deconstruct a maritime paradox that defies logic. Stay with us until the very end to discover how one mechanical betrayal redefined survival and the haunting legacy that remains hidden beneath the waves. By the autumn of 1944, a brutal and silent war of attrition in the Pacific was fundamentally deciding the fate of the Japanese Empire. While the world focused on the thunderous surface-level clashes of massive carrier groups and battleships, it was the U.S. Navy's silent service that served as the primary instrument of strangulation against the Japanese imperial supply lines. Operating in isolation across thousands of miles of hostile ocean, this elite fleet of 300 submarines amassed a staggering and historically unprecedented toll: over 5 million tons of shipping sent to the ocean floor, including more than 200 warships and 1,100 merchant vessels. Rising from the ranks of these ghost-like predators was the USS Tang, SS-306. Launched in 1943 at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard, the Tang was a Balao-class submarine, the undisputed and refined workhorse of the Pacific theater. She was an apex predator, born of mid-century engineering, a sleek, lethal tube of Bessemer steel, stretching 311 feet from bow to stern and displacing over 2,400 tons when submerged. The Tang was more than just a boat. It was a self-contained high-tech weapon of war. Powered by a sophisticated diesel-electric system, she could sustain a surface speed of 20-25 knots of velocity that allowed her to aggressively outpace and outmaneuver the vast majority of Japanese merchant convoys. Her primary teeth consisted of 24 deadly Mark 18 torpedoes, a revolutionary and controversial electric weapon designed to leave no revealing bubble trail on the surface. This wakeless technology made the Tang's attacks as invisible as they were lethal, though the hidden mechanical complexities. However, the Tang's true lethality lay not just in its steel, but in the man at the helm, Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane. O'Kane was a veteran of the submarine service with a refined hunter's instinct, known throughout the fleet for his aggressive close-quarters surface attacks under the absolute cover of darkness. He commanded a crew of nearly 90 men who existed in a constant grinding paradox of high technology and primal hardship. Inside the windowless iron hull, the atmosphere was a permanent sickening cocktail of diesel fumes, recycled oxygen, hydraulic fluid, and human sweat. The crew lived in a world where space was the most precious commodity. Men slept in hot bunks, a system where a sailor rotated into a bed that was still warm from the body of the man who had just left for his shift. In this subterranean environment of humming machinery, the only thing stronger than the oppressive claustrophobia was the absolute unwavering trust the crew placed in their commander and in the perceived invincibility of their boat. A submarine's legacy is written in the blood and iron of its patrols, and for the USS Tang, the first 4 chapters of its life were a masterclass in naval dominance. On its first patrol in January 1944, the Tang achieved in a few weeks what most boats took years of service to accomplish. Navigating the waters of the Caroline and Mariana Islands, she sank 5 enemy ships in a single deployment. Most remarkably, the crew scored hits with an unheard-of 2/3 of the torpedoes they fired, a level of accuracy that stunned Naval Command in Pearl Harbor. Overnight, the Tang was no longer just a new boat. It was a prioritized threat to the Japanese maritime defense. However, a naval legend requires more than just the ability to destroy. It requires a demonstrated strength of character. During its second patrol near the Japanese stronghold of Truk Lagoon, the Tang was assigned the grueling and high-risk task of lifeguard duty. O'Kane took the boat to the very edge of enemy air defenses, surfacing in treacherous contested waters to pull 22 downed American aviators from the sea. These were pilots whose planes had been shredded in combat over the lagoon, and without the Tang, they would have been lost to the abyss. This mission solidified the crew's psychological standing. They weren't just efficient killers. They were a lifeline. The rescue of 22 men from the jaws of certain death forged a bond of shared destiny that would define the crew's morale for the remainder of the war. By the third patrol in June 1944, the Tang had become a statistical anomaly, a vessel that seemed to defy the standard laws of probability. Operating in the East China and Yellow Seas, O'Kane unleashed a tactical blitzkrieg, destroying 4 vessels in a single day, a feat that cemented his reputation as one of the most aggressive commanders in history. By the time they returned to port, the Tang had decimated Japanese shipping lanes, sinking 10 ships totaling 39,000 tons of critical supplies. The Tang was now a household name among the Navy's elite, perceived as a boat that could survive any encounter and strike any target with impunity. But it was the 4th patrol that truly proved the Tang's raw grit and the technical resilience of her hull. O'Kane ventured directly off the coast of the Japanese home islands waters that were notoriously shallow, heavily mined, and swarming with sonar-equipped escorts. On August 11th, 1944, after ambushing a convoy, the Tang was discovered and forced into a desperate dive. For 38 relentless minutes, she endured a barrage of Japanese depth charges. In these shallow waters, the physics of underwater explosions were catastrophic. The pressure waves reflected off the seabed and struck the hull with double the force of an open ocean blast. The Tang was rattled to her core, but she held together. When O'Kane finally crept back to periscope depth to witness the burning wreckage of the ships he had targeted, the message to the Japanese Navy was clear. No water was too shallow, and no enemy was safe from the Tang. As the summer of 1944 drew to a close, the USS Tang had sunk more tonnage in its short service than nearly any other boat in American history. They were the undisputed masters of the Pacific, seemingly untouchable and blessed by fortune. Yet, as they prepared for their 5th and final patrol, this very aura of invincibility was creating a dangerous, invisible momentum. A collective confirmation bias had taken root within the crew and command a psychological belief that the Tang was now immune to the laws of tragedy and the failures of engineering. They were entering the Formosa Strait not just with the best equipment and the best training, but with a sense of destiny that would soon blind them to a fatal mechanical betrayal. On September 24th, 1944, the USS Tang slipped out of Pearl Harbor for what was intended to be its most ambitious deployment yet. Commander Richard O'Kane was ordered to patrol the Formosa Strait, the narrow, treacherous corridor of water separating Taiwan from mainland China. In the brutal calculus of World War II, naval strategy, the strait was a high-stakes shooting gallery. It was the primary artery for Japanese supply lines, but for a submariner it was a tactical graveyard. The environment was defined by its suffocating shallowness, with depths frequently averaging less than 200 feet. In these shallow waters, the fundamental physics of submarine survival were catastrophically altered. In the vast open ocean, a submarine's primary defense against depth charges is the volume of water. The kinetic energy of an explosion dissipates rapidly into the infinite blue. However, the Formosa Strait offered no such mercy. Here, the hard, compacted seabed acted as a gargantuan acoustic mirror. When a Japanese escort ship dropped a depth charge, the resulting blast wave would not only strike the hull of the Tang directly, but would also slam into the ocean floor and reflect upward. This bottom bounce effect meant the submarine's hull was often struck twice by the same explosion, once from above and once from below, effectively doubling the crushing force. The mission reached a fever pitch on the night of October 23rd. In a display of tactical audacity that continues to haunt naval history, O'Kane abandoned the standard periscope depth doctrine. Instead, he surfaced the Tang and drifted directly into the heart of a massive 30-ship Japanese convoy. Exploiting the darkness and the submarine's low silhouette, O'Kane turned the strait into a chaotic inferno. By the time the sun rose on October 24th, the Tang had shattered every existing record in the silent service, sinking 13 enemy ships in a single night. It was the most devastating performance by a single vessel in the history of the U.S. Navy. Yet this victory carried a hidden price. The crew was physically and mentally shattered, fueled only by pure adrenaline and the intoxicating, dangerous aura of their own perceived invincibility. It is at this peak of triumph that we must conduct a psychological autopsy of the psychology of command. After such an unprecedented victory, a rational commander, one governed by the cold laws of probability, would have turned for home to preserve his crew. But O'Kane was gripped by a phenomenon known as target fixation. In combat psychology, this occurs when the brain's tunnel vision becomes so focused on a singular objective that it overrides situational awareness and the perception of risk. The euphoria of the previous 48 hours had solidified a confirmation bias because they had survived the impossible so many times the crew and command began to believe they were now immune to the laws of failure. They no longer saw the Formosa Strait as a trap. They saw it as their personal hunting ground. At 2:30 a.m. on October 25th near Turnabout Island, O'Kane spotted his final quarry, the Koshu Maru, a crippled Japanese transport ship drifting helplessly after earlier strikes. The Tang had only 2 torpedoes remaining in her forward tubes, numbers 23 and 24. Logically, the risk of engaging was astronomical. The submarine was operating in shallow water with no defensive reserves left. If discovered by an escort now, they had no teeth to fight back. Furthermore, the crew was running on fumes, their reaction times dulled by days of high-intensity combat. Yet, the momentum of glory is a powerful, blinding drug. This specific moment defines the thin, vibrating line between a decorated hero and fatal recklessness. To ensure a perfect conclusion to a record-breaking patrol, O'Kane made a fateful tactical departure from standard U.S. Navy doctrine. He ordered the Tang to close the distance to a mere 700 yards, so close the submarine was nearly visible to the naked eye from the transport's deck. Most critically, he ordered the boat to come to a full stop. Standard operating procedure dictated firing while maintaining headway to allow for an immediate evasive maneuver. However, O'Kane prioritized absolute forensic precision over basic safety. He wanted to ensure that the final sting of the Tang would not miss. Torpedo number 23 hissed out of the tube cleanly. Seconds later, a pillar of fire erupted as it struck the Koshu Maru, squarely further crippling the massive vessel. The crew felt the vibration of success. Then came the final act of the patrol. O'Kane ordered the firing of torpedo number 24, the very last weapon in their arsenal. At 2:40 a.m. on October 25, 1944, the oppressive silence of the Formosa Strait was broken by the sharp metallic hiss of high-pressure air. From the bow of the USS Tang torpedo number 24, the very last weapon in her inventory was ejected into the black water. For the men on the bridge, this was supposed to be the final act of a naval masterpiece, the closing shot of the most successful patrol in American history. But within 5 heartbeats, the rhythm of the ocean changed. The torpedo did not track straight toward the crippled Koshu Maru. Instead, it broached the surface like a panicked animal, wobbled violently with a sickening mechanical shudder, and veered sharply to the left in a terrifying, erratic arc. To understand the horror of this moment, we must conduct a forensic technical analysis of the Mark 18 electric torpedo. In 1944, the Mark 18 was the Navy's cutting-edge answer to the outdated steam torpedoes. Unlike its predecessors, which left a visible trail of bubbles that acted as a highway for enemy escorts to find a submarine, the Mark 18 was stealth technology. It was powered by massive heavy lead-acid batteries intended to run silent and invisible. However, these batteries were a monumental liability. They were notoriously sensitive to the brutal, bone-shaking vibrations of depth-charge attacks, the very kind of attacks the Tang had endured for 38 minutes during her previous patrol. This leads us to a dark and infuriating naval scandal, the bureaucratic negligence of the Bureau of Ordnance, BUORDA. Throughout the early years of the war, American submariners were essentially sent into combat with defective boomerangs. They were forced to use weapons that failed to explode, ran far too deep, or in the most horrifying cases suffered from a catastrophic circular run defect. Due to a flawed steering rudder design that could jam if the battery cells shifted by even a fraction of an inch, the torpedo would lose its orientation. Instead of seeking the enemy, it would hunt the nearest magnetic or acoustic signature, the boat that fired it. It remains a cruel historical paradox. The greatest threat to the 87 men aboard the Tang was not the Japanese Imperial Navy. It was a faulty blueprint approved by pencil pushers in Washington, D.C., who refused to listen to frontline reports. Standing on the bridge, Commander O'Kane was the first to realize the nightmare. He saw the phosphorescent glowing wake of his own weapon curving back toward the Tang with predatory speed. He roared the only command that could possibly save them: emergency speed, all engines ahead, hard a port. He was attempting to swing the stern of the Tang away from the incoming strike, hoping to let the torpedo pass harmlessly by. But the Tang, being at a full stop to ensure her own perfect shot, had no momentum. She was a sitting duck. Exactly 20 seconds after launch, the mechanical betrayal was complete. The Mark 18 slammed into the Tang's stern directly adjacent to the after torpedo room. The explosion was not just a blast, it was a cataclysm. The force X-rayed through the pressure hull, instantly vaporizing the men in the rear compartments and throwing those in the forward sections against steel bulkheads with the force of a high-speed car crash. The lights vanished instantly as the main electrical bus was severed, plunging the compartments into a suffocating pitch-black darkness, filled with the ozone of electrical fires, the stench of burning insulation, and the deafening roar of rushing seawater. As the 3 rear compartments flooded within seconds, the Tang lost all buoyancy. The weight of the Pacific dragged the back of the ship down at a terrifying angle. In those chaotic moments, O'Kane and the men on the bridge were not just washed away, they were hurled into the freezing sea by the violent whip of the ship's descent. As the submarine vanished beneath the waves, it took the screams of those trapped inside with it. Within minutes, the USS Tang struck the seafloor at a depth of 180 feet. She came to rest in a grotesque final position, her stern crumpled against the silt, her bow angled upward at a sharp 45 degrees. It was no longer the Pacific's greatest hunter. It was a silent steel tomb for 78 men, trapped 18 stories below the surface in a world of rising water and dwindling air. When the USS Tang finally slammed into the floor of the Formosa Strait at a depth of 180 feet, the violent roar of the sinking gave way to a suffocating, pressurized silence. Of the 87 men who had begun the patrol, approximately 30 survivors found themselves alive, but entombed in the forward torpedo room. The situation was a nightmare of escalating crises. Above them, the Japanese frigate P-34 was already patrolling the surface like a vulture, dropping depth charges that sent shockwaves through the wounded hull. These explosions did more than just rattle the ship. They triggered a lethal chain reaction. The massive forward battery cells, shattered by the initial torpedo impact, began to short-circuit and leak toxic acid. This ignited a raging electrical fire that filled the compartment with thick, acrid smoke. As the internal temperature soared past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the moisture in the air combined with the smoke causing the heavy paint on the bulkheads to melt and run down the walls in streaks that looked like black tears. It is within this hellish environment that we encounter one of the most haunting and deeply human stories of the maritime world, the case of George Zofkin. As the senior officers frantically organized an orderly escape plan, Zofkin, a veteran sailor who had faced death a dozen times, made a quiet, chilling realization. He couldn't swim. In the middle of an iron tomb, 180 feet below the surface, surrounded by fire and rising water, Zofkin chose a path of profound dignity. He did not panic or demand a priority spot in the escape trunk. Instead, he stood up calmly, shook the hands of his comrades and bid them farewell. He then walked back to his bunk, lay down in the darkness, and waited for the ocean to claim him. His decision serves as a somber, low note in this narrative, a stark forensic reminder of the absolute psychological helplessness felt by those who understood that their personal survival was a physical impossibility. For the men who chose to fight, their only hope was a piece of technology that had never been proven in a real-world disaster, the Momsen lung. This was a primitive rebreather, a small rubber bag strapped to the chest, containing a canister of soda lime to scrub carbon dioxide and allow the user to recycle a small amount of oxygen. To use it, the survivors had to utilize the escape chamber and airlock, roughly the size of a telephone booth. 4 men would squeeze into the cramped space at a time. The outer hatch would be sealed and the chamber would be flooded with seawater to equalize the internal pressure with the crushing weight of the ocean outside. This process was agonizing. As the pressure rose, the men felt as though hot needles were being driven through their eardrums, a sensation that only the most disciplined could endure without screaming. However, the greatest threat to their lives was not the water or the Japanese depth charges, it was the forensic physics of survival. To ascend from 180 feet to the surface, the survivors had to battle air embolism. In the world of high-pressure physics, as a human rises and the external water pressure decreases, the air trapped inside the lungs expands at an exponential rate. If a sailor panicked and held his breath for even a few seconds during the ascent, the air in his lungs would expand so violently that his lungs would literally rupture or explode. This would force massive air bubbles into the pulmonary veins, leading to a fatal blockage of blood flow to the brain or heart. To survive, the men had to do something entirely counterintuitive. They had to exhale continuously throughout the entire 180-foot climb, often whistling or screaming on the way up to ensure the expanding air could escape. The actual escape began around 6 a.m. One by one, in groups of 4, the men entered the escape trunk. They were guided by a single rope attached to a buoy that had been released to the surface. But the journey was far from certain. In the pitch darkness of the abyss, the sailors struggled to maintain their grip on the line. The disorientation was total. Without the line, they had no sense of up or down. Of the 13 men who successfully cycled through the hatch and stepped out into the black void of the Pacific, only 6 reached the surface alive. The others were lost to the disorientation of the deep, their lungs failing them, or their strength giving out before they could breach the air. By the time the final survivors broke the surface and gasped for oxygen under the rising sun, they were no longer just soldiers. They were the few remaining witnesses to a miracle of survival that had been paid for with the lives of 78 of their brothers. As the sun crested the horizon of the Formosa Strait on the morning of October 25, 1944, the surface of the sea was a haunting tableau of oil slicks and shattered timber. Bobbing in the center of this wreckage were the 9 survivors of the USS Tang. Among them were Commander Richard O'Kane, 3 officers blown off the bridge during the blast, and the 5 exhausted sailors who had just performed the impossible 180-foot ascent from the seafloor. For a brief flickering moment, they felt the euphoria of life. But as a silhouette sharpened on the horizon, they realized their miracle of survival was merely an entrance into a new kind of purgatory. The approaching vessel was the Japanese frigate P-34, and what followed was not a maritime rescue, but a violent psychological collision of 2 worlds broken by fire. The Japanese sailors on that frigate were not detached combatants. They were the traumatized survivors of the very convoys the Tang had spent the last 48 hours annihilating. They had spent the previous nights watching their sister ships turn into pillars of flame and listening to the screams of thousands of their comrades as they were sucked into the abyss. To these Japanese sailors, the 9 men they pulled from the water were not honorable prisoners. They were the faceless demons who had caused their world to collapse. This triggered a raw, unfiltered manifestation of loss-driven vengeance. The Americans were met not with blankets, but with boots, rifle butts, and broken glass. Every strike was a payment for a specific life lost beneath the waves. They were bound, stripped of their clothing, and forced to sit on the scorching steel deck for 5 days without food, water, or shade, their skin blistering into a roadmap of agony. However, the deck of the P-34 was merely the preamble to a more systematic, institutionalized hell. Upon reaching Formosa and later mainland Japan, the survivors were funneled into the Ofuna interrogation camp and later the Omori POW camp. It was here that the Japanese government made a chilling and strategically cruel legal distinction because the Tang's mission involved the sinking of merchant and transport vessels. Its crew were classified not as prisoners of war, POW, but as unregistered war criminals. This classification was a forensic death sentence. It stripped the men of all protections under the Geneva Convention, ensuring that no Red Cross representatives would ever know they existed. In the eyes of their captors, they were not soldiers. They were murderers. This led to a period of starvation torture and total isolation. The men were forbidden from speaking, looking at the guards, or even acknowledging one another. Their world shrunk to the dimensions of a drafty, lice-infested wooden shack, or, in O'Kane's case, a windowless concrete solitary cell. The forensic reality of their captivity was a slow, agonizing descent into biological decay. The human body is a machine that requires specific inputs to survive, and the Japanese provided almost none. The men were fed meager portions of maggot-infested rice, mixed with barley and occasionally a watery soup made from grass or turnip tops. Within weeks, the legendary physical resilience of these elite submariners collapsed. They succumbed to beriberi, a horrific vitamin B1 deficiency that causes the limbs to swell with fluid until the skin is taut and transparent, often leading to heart failure. Simultaneously, scurvy took hold. Their gums, rotted old wounds reopened, and their teeth began to fall out in the silence of their cells. Richard O'Kane, the man who had mastered the most complex weapon of his era and commanded the vastness of the Pacific, was reduced to a skeleton in a cage. In the crushing silence of solitary confinement, he fought a psychological war to maintain his sanity, replaying every moment of the sinking and grappling with the suffocating guilt of the 78 men he had left behind in the dark. The silent service had truly become silent not through stealth, but through the systematic erasure of their humanity. In August 1945, the atomic shadows cast over Hiroshima and Nagasaki signaled the sudden, jarring conclusion of the Pacific War. For the survivors of the USS Tang liberation did not arrive with the thunder of drums or the roar of a victory parade. It came with a hollow, bewildered silence. When American recovery teams finally reached the gates of the Omori and Ofuna interrogation camps on August 28, 1945, they discovered 8 men who were mere ghosts of the elite submariners they had once been. Emaciated, skeletal, and suffering from the agonizing advanced stages of beriberi and scurvy, these men had achieved a feat of endurance that remains unparalleled in naval history. They had survived the unsurvivable, twice first escaping the crushing darkness of the ocean floor, and then enduring the systematic depravity of human cruelty in captivity. Of the 9 men who were originally pulled from the debris in the Formosa Strait, 8 had survived the full ordeal, their bodies broken, but their spirits remarkably intact. Upon his return to the United States, Richard O'Kane was greeted not just as a survivor, but as a titan of the American war effort. In a solemn ceremony at the White House, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, for his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity during the Tang's final patrols. However, the forensic reality of O'Kane's post-war existence offers what historians call golden material for understanding the agony of command. O'Kane remained a man of immense, almost painful humility. He consistently refused to view the medal as a personal achievement, stating on numerous occasions that he accepted the honor only as a proxy for the 78 men he was forced to leave behind in the lightless ribs of the Tang. Despite the parades and the accolades, O'Kane was a man forever haunted by a mechanical betrayal. He spent decades grappling with the memory of that circular running torpedo, the weapon that had been his sting, but became his crew's executioner. He was plagued by a singular crushing question that no metal could answer. Could he have done more? This is the silent, lifelong burden of every commander who survives the destruction of his command. A psychological weight that persists long after the wounds of war have scarred over. He didn't just carry the glory of the Tang. He carried the heavy silence of the 78 souls who remained at 180 feet. Among those O'Kane mourned most deeply was the youngest casualty of the disaster and arguably the most tragic figure in the entire American naval record. Ruben Rayford was a mere 15 years old when the Tang met her end. Having forged his documents and lied about his age to serve a country that desperately needed sailors, Rayford remains officially recognized as the youngest American service member to die in combat during World War II. His presence on such a lethal vessel serves as a haunting symbol of the innocents sacrificed within the vast, indifferent machinery of total war. A child soldier in the world's most sophisticated predator, lost to a flaw in a blueprint. Today, the wreck of the USS Tang still rests on the floor of the Formosa Strait, settled into the silt at the approximate coordinates of her final strike. She is no longer a weapon of war or a piece of rusted history. She is an official war grave, a silent steel cathedral for those 78 souls. Forensic surveys indicate that the ship remains in her final defiant posture, her stern crumpled by the force of the circular run, her bow still angled toward the surface. She almost reached a permanent monument to the desperate struggle for breath. So, what is the ultimate legacy of the USS Tang? The lesson of this tragedy is not merely a technical warning about faulty torpedoes or the lethal arrogance of bureaucratic negligence. It is a profound meditation on the absolute limits of human mastery. Even with the most sophisticated technology of the era, the most elite training, and the most brilliant leadership, we remain perpetually subject to the chaotic whims of fate and the inherent fragility of our own creations. The Tang reminds us that in the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean, the line between a legendary victory and an unthinkable catastrophe is often as thin as a single jammed rudder. The silent service continues its eternal watch beneath the waves, a haunting reminder that while glory is fleeting and often born of blood, the sacrifice of those who go down with their ships is eternal. We bow our heads in memory of the 78 brave souls lost in the Formosa Strait on October 25th, 1944, including young Ruben Rayford, who gave his life at just 15 years old. Their sacrifice remains eternally anchored in the deep. And before we end today's message, thank you for walking this haunted path with me. If the silent courage of the USS Tang moved you, or if you have your own maritime stories to share, please join the conversation in the comments below. To honor this history, please like, share, and follow for more. I'm your narrator, and I'll see you in the next video.